The sky above the alien planet, Tekar, was a canvas of fire. Bright flashes of light lit up the horizon as explosions rocked the surface. It was a battle that seemed doomed from the start. The once thriving planet, home to the mighty Zorethians, was now in ruins. Their cities, once shining beacons of technological brilliance, lay smoldering under the relentless assault of the Galactic Council's warships. Zorethian soldiers fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered and outgunned by an enemy that seemed unstoppable. For months, the Zorethians had been resisting the Galactic Council's overwhelming power. The Council's forces, led by a merciless fleet of warships and drones, had been systematically tearing down their civilization. Each Zorethian city, each stronghold, fell one by one, leaving nothing but dust and ashes behind. The once proud race now found themselves in a desperate fight for survival. On the surface, Zyril, the Zorethian fleet commander, stood at the edge of what remained of his command center, overlooking the destruction. His sharp green eyes scanned the skies, filled with the flickering lights of battle. The air was thick with smoke, and the ground beneath him trembled as shockwaves from distant explosions reverberated across the landscape. His heart pounded in his chest, but his expression remained stoic. There was nothing left to do, he thought. His people were being wiped out. "This is it," Zyril muttered under his breath. "Our final stand." The Zorethian fleet had fought with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. Ships that had once been the envy of the galaxy now drifted aimlessly in space, destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The survivors, now a fraction of their former strength, were preparing for the final evacuation. It was a bitter reality. Zorethians, once rulers of their star systems, were now reduced to fleeing for their lives. Zyril's fleet had already lost contact with many of their outlying colonies. The remaining civilians had been gathered on a few dozen ships, ready to make the long, dangerous journey to the nearest uninhabited system, where they could hide and rebuild. But even that wasn't guaranteed. The Galactic Council's ships, enormous and deadly, were already bearing down on their last defense. As Zyril gave the final order to retreat, the communication officer's voice crackled in his ear. "Commander Zyril, you need to hear this." The officer sounded shaken, a rarity for someone so seasoned. Zyril turned sharply, his curiosity piqued. He stepped towards the communication panel, his mind already anticipating another grim report. "What is it?" The officer hesitated, then hit a button. A transmission popped up on the screen, a message, encrypted and unfamiliar. Zyril's brow furrowed. It wasn't from a Zorethian or any ally they had left. The message was simple but chilling. "Human fleet inbound. Prepare for the unexpected." Zyril blinked. At first, he thought it might be a trick, some kind of last-ditch effort from the Galactic Council to confuse them. The humans, the weak, insignificant humans, who had never been able to even send a fleet into space without losing half of it in accidents. How could they possibly have arrived at such a critical moment? Zyril's mind raced. The human race was the last thing he expected to hear about. While the Zorethians had been busy fighting the Council, humanity had remained in the background, like ants beneath the feet of the galaxy's titans. Their technology was primitive, their ships outdated compared to the Council's advanced warships. The idea that the humans were coming to their aid was nothing short of impossible. Yet there it was, staring back at him on the screen. Zyril quickly turned to his officers, but they looked as confused and bewildered as he felt. "Human fleet," one officer repeated, almost as if testing the words out loud, as if he thought they might sound different the second time. Another officer, Lyra, a seasoned warrior, stepped forward. "Commander, should we trust it?" Her voice was tight with skepticism. "Do you think this is a trap?" Zyril shook his head slowly. He couldn't fathom how the humans could pose a threat in this situation. But then again, if they were truly arriving, they must have some kind of advantage they hadn't counted on. He had heard rumors of humanity's unpredictable nature, their ability to surprise their enemies with strategies that defied logic. But this This was different. The timing was too perfect. Was this their final act of defiance? Or was it a trap set by the Galactic Council? Zirl had no answers, but one thing was certain. They couldn't afford to ignore this. Open a channel to the fleet. Prepare to defend, Zirl ordered, his voice steady. We don't know what we're dealing with, but we need to be ready for anything. As his officers scrambled to execute his orders, Zirl gazed out at the chaos unfolding outside. The Zorethian fleet was barely holding on. He had lost so many good soldiers, so many great ships. And now, there was a possibility, however unlikely, that the humans might be able to turn the tide. It's a long shot, Zirl muttered, but it's all we have left. Meanwhile, in space above the planet, the Galactic Council's fleet continued its assault, launching devastating energy blasts toward the last of the Zorethian defenses. The Zorethian warships, already crippled, struggled to retaliate. The Council was relentless, using their advanced AI systems to track every movement and anticipate every maneuver. Just as Zirl was about to give the order to engage, something unexpected happened. A series of bright, sudden flashes appeared in the distance. It wasn't the Council's ships. Those had been visible for days. This was something new, something strange. What the? Zirl gasped. The flashes grew larger, taking shape into several dozen ships, all emerging from hyperspace at once. They were small, their designs nothing like the sleek, deadly warships of the Galactic Council. But they moved with surprising precision, darting through space in a way that felt almost coordinated, almost like they were searching for something. Zirl's mind raced as he watched the ships materialize. Could this be the human fleet? Was it truly them? Then, without warning, the ships activated a cloaking device. Zirl's eyes widened in disbelief as the fleet vanished, leaving only a shimmering trail behind them. The humans, if that's who they were hiding. The Zorethian sensors were useless against the cloaking technology. It was as though the humans had anticipated the battle's turning point and were waiting for the right moment to strike. Zirl's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. What are they doing? His officers exchanged nervous glances. They were in the dark, as much as Zirl was. The situation was growing more confusing by the minute. This is it, Zirl whispered. This is humanity's moment. Let's hope they know what they're doing. But the question remained. Could the humans, with their primitive technology and small, seemingly weak fleet, really make a difference? Or was this a trap? A distraction meant to lull them into a false sense of hope before the real attack came from the Galactic Council. The scene in space above Tekar was chaotic. The once pristine beauty of the planet had now been marred by the debris of countless battles. The Zorethian warships, damaged and desperate, were slowly retreating under the relentless assault of the Galactic Council's fleet. The commanders and soldiers of the Zorethian race, some battered and bruised from months of fighting, could only watch as the final moments of their civilization unfolded before their eyes. But then, something happened, something no one had expected. Far in the distance, a new fleet appeared, a group of ships barely noticeable at first, but their arrival sent shockwaves through the remaining Zorethian forces. Zirl, standing in the command center, squinted at the view screen in disbelief. The ships didn't look like anything he had seen before. They were small, too small, and their designs were far less sophisticated than anything the Galactic Council would field. At first glance, they seemed like nothing more than an old-fashioned, ragtag group of ships. No sleek designs, no powerful weapons, just a handful of ships seemingly out of place in a galaxy dominated by highly advanced civilizations. Zirl's first instinct was to dismiss them, to believe they were just some isolated faction, perhaps a band of survivors who had somehow stumbled upon the battle. But then, as he continued to observe, something extraordinary happened. The ships began to disappear. One by one, the human ships vanished into thin air, cloaked by technology that even Zirl, a veteran of countless battles, had never seen before. The Zorethian fleet's scanners failed to detect them. and their sensors couldn't lock on. It was as if these humans had developed some form of invisibility, an advanced cloaking technology that could evade detection completely. Zeril had to rub his eyes to make sure he wasn't imagining it. "What is this?" Zeril muttered to himself. How can they do that? The human fleet, despite its small size, had turned the tide of the battle before it had even begun. Zeril watched in stunned silence as the cloaked ships moved swiftly toward the Galactic Council's fleet. No one had anticipated this, least of all the Zorathians. "What are they waiting for?" Lyra, one of Zeril's officers, asked. Her voice was tinged with disbelief as she stared at the screen. "They're just waiting there, hidden." Zeril frowned, his mind racing. He knew the Galactic Council's forces were formidable. Their ships were massive, heavily armed, and technologically superior to anything the Zorathians had ever faced. But even they had vulnerabilities, and it seemed the humans, despite their outdated ships, had found a way to exploit them. The human fleet moved carefully, staying hidden within the shadows of space, using their cloaking devices to stay out of sight. Zeril could only watch, unsure of what the humans were planning. Suddenly, a flash of light erupted from one of the cloaked ships. A beam of energy shot forward, striking the closest Galactic Council warship. EMP blast, Zeril realized. They've disabled their systems. The Galactic Council's ship, once a fearsome machine of war, now hung motionless in space. Its lights flickered out, and its massive weapons were useless. The human fleet's strategy had been simple but effective. They were not going to face the Council's fleet head-on. Instead, they would cripple their enemies from within, using tactics that were clever and precise. Another flash of light, and another Council warship fell silent. The humans had used their EMP technology to disable not just the weapons, but the communication systems as well. The Council's fleet was now blind, unable to coordinate or respond effectively. The humans were picking them off one by one, and the Zorathians could only watch in awe. "This is impossible," Zeril whispered, his mind struggling to process what was happening. How can a race so weak fight so well? The human ships, still cloaked, moved quickly from one target to the next, disabling weapon systems, disabling shields, and throwing the Council's fleet into disarray. It was a textbook example of guerrilla warfare. The humans, despite their lack of resources, had found a way to level the playing field. They were attacking with precision, focusing on the most vulnerable parts of the enemy ships. The Galactic Council, the self-proclaimed rulers of the galaxy, were now on the defensive, a position they had never expected to find themselves in. Zeril stood in stunned silence, unable to tear his eyes away from the screen. It was almost as if the humans knew exactly how to exploit the Council's weaknesses. Their tactics were ruthless but intelligent, and every move seemed to be calculated with careful precision. They were making up for their lack of technological power with something far more dangerous: strategy. "Why are they not attacking directly?" Lyra asked, still watching the human fleet. "They're just disabling them. Why aren't they trying to destroy them?" Zeril took a moment to consider the question. "They're trying to weaken them," he said slowly. "A direct assault would be suicide. These humans, they know their limitations. They're not trying to defeat the Council with force. They're using their weaknesses against them." And it worked. The EMP attacks were not only disabling the Council's ships, but they were also creating chaos within the enemy ranks. Zeril saw Council warships crashing into each other, their once efficient fleet now in a state of disarray. The humans were playing the perfect underdog game, small, weak, and seemingly outmatched. But every step they took was designed to hurt the enemy in a way that mattered. Zeril turned to his officers, who were equally astonished. "We must take action," he said firmly. "We can't let them fight alone. If they're truly here to help us, we owe it to them to fight with them." But even as Zeril spoke, he knew the true extent of their reliance on the humans. The Zorathians were far from the powerful warriors they had once been. Their fleet was all but destroyed, their technology outdated and incapable of facing the sheer might of the Galactic Council. And yet, here were the humans, an underdog force, fighting with tactics and cunning beyond anything Zyril could have imagined. "We fight with them," Zyril said, determination flashing in his eyes. "If they can hold their ground, then so can we." Just as the Zorathian fleet began to regroup and launch their counteroffensive, the humans made their next move. With the Council ships disabled, they launched a wave of attacks against the now vulnerable enemy warships. Using their cloaking devices to stay hidden, the humans struck with surgical precision, taking out power cores and critical systems. The battle was shifting, and the tide was turning in ways no one had predicted. "This is it," Zyril said. "They're doing it. They're winning." But even as the humans pressed on, Zyril couldn't shake the question that lingered in his mind. How can such a weak race fight this well? The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, the Zorathians had hope. The humans were proving that with determination, strategy, and courage, even the smallest force could make a difference. The tide of war had shifted, and Zyril knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger fight. The battle raged on, the skies above Tekar filled with the wreckage of warships. For the past few hours, the human fleet had fought relentlessly, their surprise tactics continuing to take down ship after ship in the Galactic Council's mighty fleet. But the aliens weren't giving up. Zyril's forces, though in disarray, were regrouping. Yet the humans showed no signs of slowing down. It was as if every move they made was carefully planned. An underdog force, fighting with the precision and strategy of a far more advanced race. Zyril, standing at the heart of the command center, could only watch in disbelief. His fleet, once proud and powerful, was now falling apart before his eyes. The humans, with their outdated ships, their seemingly primitive technology, were turning the tide of this battle in ways no one could have imagined. It was almost as if the humans had found a way to exploit every weakness of the Galactic Council's once impenetrable force. But the moment that would change everything came without warning. A new wave of attack began. This time, it was not from the cloaked ships or EMP blasts. Instead, the humans launched something far more dangerous. Drones. Small, agile, AI-controlled drones, each one programmed to disable and destroy anything in its path. The drones swarmed the battlefield like a cloud of metal wasps, their movements swift and deadly. The robotic forces of the Galactic Council, once thought to be unbeatable, now found themselves under attack from their own kind. The human drones, equipped with sophisticated AI, infiltrated the Council's robotic army, taking control of the enemy machines and turning them against their creators. The once imposing robotic soldiers of the Galactic Council were now their greatest threat, but it was the humans who had orchestrated this chaos. Zyril couldn't believe what he was seeing. The drones zipped through the battlefield, avoiding fire from enemy warships and landing directly on robotic forces. With a pulse of energy, they took control of the machines, their programming now overwritten. The alien robots, meant to be the backbone of the Council's army, were now fighting for the humans. How is this possible? Zyril whispered to himself, his mind racing. He had seen robots fight for the Galactic Council for years, huge, powerful, seemingly unstoppable. And now, they were being used against him. These primitive humans had found a way to hack into and control the machines that were supposed to secure the victory for the Council. It was a blow to Zyril's pride and his belief that the Council's technology could never be defeated. The AI-controlled drones were methodical, efficient, and cold. Every move they made was calculated to cause maximum damage. They disabled weapon systems, took out shields, and broke down the alien robots' defenses. In mere minutes, the once powerful robotic army was reduced to a pile of scrap metal, no match for the human drones that now controlled the battlefield. Zyril clenched his fists, his heart racing. He knew this battle was slipping away, but he couldn't afford to retreat. Not yet. "Hold your ground," he ordered his officers, but his voice trembled slightly with doubt. And then, just as the drones were starting to clear the battlefield of the alien robotic forces, another blow struck. Ziral's closest friend, Bonner, a seasoned warrior who had fought by his side for years, was caught in the explosion of a nearby warship. A fierce battle raged around him, with human and alien forces clashing in the wreckage of a destroyed ship. Bonner, Ziral's voice cracked as he watched helplessly from the command center. Bonner's ship had taken a direct hit. The explosion sent shockwaves through the area, and Ziral could see the debris flying into space. There was no time for him to think. Bonner. Ziral shouted again, desperately trying to contact his friend. But it was too late. The communication was lost, and the feed on the screen flickered and died. Ziral's heart sank as the realization hit him. Bonner, his closest companion and ally, was gone. The veteran warrior, the one who had taught Ziral so much about war and honor, was dead. And it was because of these primitive humans. They had struck the blow that killed him. Ziral felt the pain of the loss deeply, but even more so, he felt the horror. This was not just another battle. This was not just another victory for the Galactic Council. This was real. This was personal. And this war, this fight, was taking lives that Ziral cared about. For a long moment, Ziral stood frozen in place. His thoughts were a whirlwind. The loss of Bonner, the destruction of his fleet, the way the humans were systematically dismantling the Galactic Council. It was almost too much to bear. He had lost friends before, but never like this. Never with such a sense of hopelessness. "We must keep fighting," Ziral finally muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "We can't stop now. Not after everything that has happened." He turned to his officers, forcing the grief aside. "Prepare for the next phase," he said, his voice firm. But the weight of Bonner's death hung heavy in the air. "We can't let the humans win. Not like this." But even as Ziral gave the order to continue the battle, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was all slipping through his fingers. The humans had already struck back, and they had done it in ways no one had ever expected. The use of AI drones, the way they had turned the robotic forces against them, it was beyond anything Ziral could have imagined. The battle continued to rage, now on the surface of the destroyed alien warship, where the wreckage of shattered ships filled the space. Explosions rocked the area, sending debris flying. Close quarters combat took place amid the wreckage. Humans, in their now infamous cloaked ships, fought alongside the Zorathians, their weapons flashing as they struck down the remaining Galactic Council soldiers. Ziral's fleet, though outnumbered and technologically inferior, fought back with the fury of desperation. But the humans were no longer the underdogs. They were the ones making the moves, dictating the pace of the battle, and every second was a reminder of how far the Galactic Council had underestimated them. Ziral knew the fight was far from over, but the loss of Bonner, the shocking defeat of the robotic forces, and the relentless pressure from the human fleet had shaken his resolve. Could the Zorathians really win this war? Could they survive the humans' sudden onslaught? For now, Ziral knew only one thing: this battle would change everything. No longer were the humans simply trying to survive. They were fighting back. And in the end, the Galactic Council might not have the power to stop them. The battle on Takar was far from over. But the human forces, against all odds, had begun to turn the tide. Despite their seemingly outdated technology, they had struck once again, a devastating blow to the Galactic Council's war machine. A massive alien battleship, one of the flagship vessels of the Council, now lay in ruins, a shattered carcass of metal floating in space. The human fleet, using their limited resources, had managed to destroy it with a combination of stealth tactics, EMP bursts, and strategic drone strikes. It was another victory for the humans, a victory that seemed impossible only hours ago. Ziral stood in his command center, staring at the holographic map of the battlefield. His mind raced as he processed what had just happened. The humans, with their primitive ships and weapons, had taken down a warship that was far more advanced than anything they had. He could hardly believe it. How? Ziral whispered to himself, his thoughts a storm of confusion and disbelief. His fleet, once proud and powerful, had been taken by surprise. The humans had used their unpredictability and ingenuity to exploit weaknesses that no one had anticipated. They didn't fight like the Zorethians or the Galactic Council. They fought like a race that had nothing to lose, willing to do anything to win. And it was working. They are not weak, Zirl thought, as a wave of realization washed over him. They are different, and that is what makes them dangerous. The humans didn't fight with overwhelming force. They didn't have the superior technology or the massive fleet that the Galactic Council possessed. But what they did have was determination, and that was something Zirl had never seen before in any species. It was a fire that burned bright, even in the face of certain destruction. As the Zorethian fleet began to regroup, Zirl couldn't shake the feeling that things were slipping out of his control. His forces, despite their strength and advanced technology, were beginning to falter. The humans had cracked the Council's defenses, and now, the Council's once unshakable morale was beginning to crumble. Zirl watched in silence as human ships launched their next assault. This time, they were no longer hiding in the shadows. They were pushing forward, taking the fight to the heart of the Council's remaining forces. The humans were no longer running. They were advancing, cutting down ship after ship, causing the Zorethian morale to falter. The humans had set up a daring trap, a plan so bold, so risky, that even Zirl couldn't believe it at first. They had harnessed the power of gravity wells and black holes, manipulating the very fabric of space itself to pull the Zorethian fleet into a deadly situation. These massive gravitational forces, combined with the black hole's pull, created an environment where nothing could escape. Even the most advanced ships in the Zorethian fleet would struggle to break free. The humans, though outnumbered and outgunned, had calculated everything down to the last detail. Their ships, equipped with advanced cloaking devices and robotic infiltrators, could slip past the alien defenses undetected. They infiltrated the alien flagship, the largest and most powerful ship in the entire fleet, in a bid to cripple Zirl's command structure. As the battle raged on, the Zorethians found themselves caught in a trap they could not escape. Their ships were pulled into the gravity wells, forced to fight in an environment where their superior technology was rendered useless. Explosions lit up the dark sky as missiles fired. Energy beams streaked across the void, and ships crumbled under the intense pressure. Zirl stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the chaos unfold around him. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. His fleet, once so mighty, was crumbling before his eyes. The humans had proven to be far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. They had turned the battlefield into their own. And now, there was no escape. In the midst of the chaos, Zirl could feel the emotional strain. The loss of his comrades, the destruction of his fleet, it was all too much. He had led his people into this war with the belief that they were the superior race, that they would crush the humans with ease. But now, as the tide turned against him, Zirl began to question everything he had once believed. In the heart of the battle, the human captain appeared, a figure that seemed almost larger than life. His ship, a sleek and advanced vessel, cut through the chaos with precision. The human fleet had coordinated their attacks flawlessly, and now they had reached the final phase of their plan. The flagship, once an invincible symbol of the Zorethian power, was in danger of being taken down. Zirl's command center was in turmoil as his officers scrambled to defend their position. But deep down, Zirl knew the truth. They were losing. There was no escaping the reality of their situation. The humans had outsmarted them at every turn. And now, they were standing on the edge of victory. With a heavy heart, Zirl gave the order to prepare for the final confrontation. His fleet was in disarray, and his soldiers were weary. But there was no other choice. They had to fight, no matter how hopeless it seemed. As Zirl prepared for battle, the human captain made his move. Using the cloaking device, The human ship slipped past the remaining alien defenses and approached the flagship. The humans had already infiltrated the ship, and now they were making their final push to destroy it. Ziral's officers were in a panic as the humans breached their defenses, infiltrating the heart of the flagship. The Zorathian command was in disarray, and Ziral realized that this was it. This was the final stand. If the flagship fell, so would the entire fleet. The humans had them cornered, and they were ready to strike the final blow. The human captain and Ziral faced each other in the control room of the flagship. The two leaders stood, locked in a silent confrontation, each knowing that this battle would decide the fate of their peoples. The human captain, though younger and less experienced than Ziral, stood with an air of confidence. His eyes were filled with determination, and his expression was one of unwavering resolve. Ziral, on the other hand, was torn. His thoughts were clouded with doubt. The once proud commander of the Zorathian fleet was now facing a truth he had never considered before. His people were not invincible. They were not the rulers of the galaxy. The humans had shown him that, no matter how strong a race might be, it could always be challenged. In the heat of the battle, the human captain took his final stand. He knew that the only way to win was to take down the flagship, to destroy the heart of the Zorathian fleet. And so, with a sacrificial spirit, he made the ultimate decision. He activated the self-destruct sequence for his ship, and as it powered up, he turned to Ziral. His last words echoed through the room, and Ziral could hear the resolve in his voice, the strength that had carried the human race through this war. For Earth, for humanity. This cannot be happening, Ziral muttered, his grip tightening on the armrest of his command chair. How can they keep going? The Zorathians had always believed in their superiority. They had always thought that no species, no matter how determined, could ever defeat them. But now, Ziral was beginning to question everything he had believed about his race. The humans, these creatures who had once been nothing more than a distant, inconsequential threat, were now proving to be a force to be reckoned with. Ziral's mind wandered back to the faces of his fallen comrades, Bonner, his closest friend, who had died in the chaos of battle. The other brave soldiers who had fought beside him for so many years. Their faces haunted him as he watched the humans fight with such fervor, such resilience. The Zorathians had always prided themselves on their strength and their advanced technology. But now it was becoming clear that the humans' greatest strength was something else entirely. It was their heart. Ziral's internal conflict deepened. He had always been taught that the Zorathians were the superior race, the rulers of the galaxy. They had conquered countless worlds, and no one had ever dared challenge them. But now, the humans were challenging them in ways Ziral had never expected. And he couldn't help but wonder, were they really the superior species, or had they become too arrogant, too reliant on their technology and strength? The weight of his thoughts pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had always believed that the Galactic Council would emerge victorious. But now, as he watched the humans push forward, he wasn't so sure anymore. His faith in the Council's invincibility was beginning to crack. The humans were fighting back, not with brute force, but with something far more powerful, willpower. As the battle raged on, Ziral's command center buzzed with activity. Officers and soldiers moved quickly, issuing commands and relaying information. Ziral was no longer focused on the tactics of war. His mind was consumed by his own doubts and questions. Was he leading his forces to victory, or was he leading them into oblivion? His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden arrival of a transmission. The message was brief, but it sent a shockwave through Ziral's body. "This is far from over," the voice on the other end said, the tone clear and resolute. "But we'll fight until the last." Ziral's heart skipped a beat. It was a transmission from the human's leader. The words echoed in his mind as he tried to process the full weight of the message. The humans weren't giving up. They weren't going to stop until the last of them fell. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Ziral clenched his fists, anger and frustration rising within him. We will not be defeated by these creatures. The words tasted bitter as he said them out loud. The once immense confidence he had in the Zorathian superiority was now clouded by doubt. We will crush them. But as he looked out at the battlefield, watching as his fleet faltered and the humans advanced, he wasn't so sure anymore. The humans were relentless. They fought with a fire that could not be extinguished, no matter how many times they were knocked down. And that was something the Zorathians had never encountered before. The Zorathians had always fought for power, for control. But the humans were fighting for something far more important. They were fighting for survival. Ziral's thoughts raced, and for the first time in his life, he questioned whether his people had truly understood what it meant to fight. It wasn't just about technology or firepower. It was about the spirit of those who fought. And the human spirit burned brighter than anything Ziral had ever seen. With every passing minute, it became clearer to Ziral that the tide was turning. The humans were no longer the underdogs. They had taken control of the battlefield, and the Zorathians were losing ground. It was only a matter of time before they were forced to retreat. Ziral felt a deep pang of guilt, a sense of regret that he couldn't shake. The faces of his fallen comrades lingered in his mind, their spirits haunting him as the battle raged on. The humans were winning, and Ziral was left to face the painful truth. His race had underestimated them. And in the end, that would be their undoing. The final battle was taking place in the dark expanse of space, above the alien planet Takar. The Zorathian fleet, once an overwhelming force, was now on the brink of collapse. Ziral's forces, despite their might, were no match for the humans' relentless tactics. The human fleet had managed to infiltrate their defenses and use their limited resources in ways no one had thought possible. Now, they were about to face each other in the ultimate showdown, the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything the humans had fought for. In that moment, Ziral felt something he had never felt before. A deep respect for this human leader, this captain who was willing to sacrifice everything for his people. The human ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, the force of the explosion shaking the flagship. The Zorathian fleet, already on the brink of collapse, could not withstand the blast. The energy from the explosion tore through the Zorathian defenses, shattering the command ship and setting off a chain reaction that destroyed the remaining warships. As the dust settled and the final moments of the battle unfolded, Ziral stood in stunned silence. His fleet was destroyed, and the humans had won. It was over. There was no more fighting, no more resistance. The humans had won, and the Zorathians had been defeated. Ziral stood on the brink of defeat, watching the aftermath of the explosion. The human captain had sacrificed himself, and in doing so, had sealed the fate of the Zorathian fleet. The human race, against all odds, had defeated their would-be conquerors. But even in this moment of victory, Ziral couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. His comrades, his people, he had led them into this battle, and now they were gone. The humans had won, but at what cost? As Ziral looked out into the void of space, he realized that this war had not been about power or dominance. It had been about survival. And in the end, the humans had proven that they would fight for their survival, no matter the cost. The battle was over, but the humans had shown that they would never back down. They would fight for what was theirs. And that was something Ziral would never forget. The final echoes of battle faded away as the dust of war settled. The once feared Zorathian fleet, a powerful force that had ravaged countless worlds, was now reduced to nothing more than burning debris scattered across the vast expanse of space. The Galactic Council, the oppressive organization that had believed in their invincibility, had been shattered. Their AI supremacy, the very foundation of their military might, was broken. And in the midst of it all, the humans stood victorious. The humans had fought with everything they had. They had sacrificed their ships, their leaders, and their very lives to take down the Zorathian Empire. Now they were left to pick up the pieces, to heal the wounds of a war that had ravaged both sides. The victory, though sweet, was not without its cost. The human fleet was battered and bruised, many of their ships destroyed or heavily damaged. Yet even in their weakened state, they stood triumphant. The Galactic Council's forces were obliterated, and with them, the power they had held over the galaxy for centuries. Amidst the victory, there was silence. Ziril, the once proud commander of the Zorethian fleet, stood alone. His people, his comrades, the mighty empire he had served, gone. He was the last of his kind. His fleet had been reduced to nothing, and now he was nothing more than a prisoner. Captured by the very humans he had once underestimated, he was forced to confront the truth. His race had fallen, not because of lack of strength or technology, but because they had failed to understand something fundamental. The humans, the so-called weak and primitive race, had shown them the true power, heart, sacrifice, and the will to survive. Ziril's gaze lingered on the human commander as he was led away to a containment facility. He could hardly believe it. The man he had once viewed as nothing more than an obstacle was now the hero, the leader who had defeated him and his entire fleet. The human commander stood tall, his face set with a quiet strength. There was no arrogance, no boasting, only the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the horrors of war and had chosen to keep fighting, no matter the odds. Ziril, bound by his captors, reflected on the final moments of the battle. He had been so sure of the superiority of his race, so certain that the Zorethian Empire would crush the humans. But now, as a prisoner, he saw the truth. The humans had never relied on brute force or advanced technology to win. They had relied on something much deeper. They had relied on each other, on their unity, and on their refusal to give up, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. In that moment, Ziril understood that true strength wasn't in superior weapons or technology. True strength lay in the hearts of those who never gave up, who never stopped fighting, no matter the cost. As Ziril was led away, he couldn't help but feel a profound sense of loss. His people had fallen because they had failed to see this truth, and now he was left to live with the consequences of his choices. The Zorethian Empire was gone, and in its place, there would be a new order. The humans, the once underestimated underdogs, were now the rulers of their own destiny. But even in the face of this loss, there was hope. The human commander, despite his victory, was not content to rest. He knew that this war was not the end, but merely the beginning of something much bigger. As Ziril watched, the humans did something that the Zorethians had never considered. They reached out to the other alien races. They offered a peace treaty, an olive branch to the defeated and the conquered. The humans were not interested in domination or revenge. They were interested in something more important, building a future of peace and unity, where all races could coexist without the threat of war hanging over their heads. Ziril had never seen anything like it. His entire life had been spent in a world where strength meant power, and power meant dominance. But now, as he watched the humans speak to the remaining alien races, offering them a chance to join in a new alliance, he saw the true power of humanity. The humans had defeated the Zorethians, yes, but they had not destroyed them out of hatred. Instead, they had sought to build something new, something better. As the peace talks continued, Ziril began to understand what the human commander had known all along. Unity was the key to true strength. It wasn't enough to have the most powerful fleet or the most advanced technology. True power came from the ability to come together, to stand as one, no matter how different you were, no matter how great the challenges might be. The humans had shown him that. They had proven that unity and determination could overcome even the greatest of adversities. The peace treaty was signed, and a new chapter began for the galaxy. The Zorethian Empire was no more, but in its place, something better was rising. The humans had forged an alliance with the remaining alien races, bringing them together in the spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. The galaxy, once torn apart by war and conflict, was now on the path to healing. Ziril, now a prisoner, had a front-row seat to the birth of this new era. He watched as humans and aliens, once bitter enemies, now stood side by side, working together to build a future that none of them could have imagined before. The peace was fragile, but there was hope. And in the heart of that hope was humanity, the human spirit, unyielding and unbreakable. As the peace talks concluded, Zerl was taken to a cell, where he would remain for the foreseeable future. But even as a prisoner, he felt a sense of peace he had never known. The humans had won, yes, but they had also shown him the true meaning of strength. They had taught him that power was not in the weapons you wielded or the fleets you commanded, but in the bonds you formed with others. It was in the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. The camera cut to the surface of the alien world, where humans and their new allies stood together, gazing up at the stars. The sky was filled with the light of 1,000 worlds, a reminder that the galaxy was vast and full of possibilities. Together, the humans and the alien races would face whatever challenges came their way. Together, they would build a future where unity and peace would reign, not through force, but through understanding. As the camera pulled back, showing the vastness of space, the final words echoed. It was over, until humanity decided it wasn't. In the end, it wasn't just a victory over the Zorathian Empire. It was the beginning of something much more powerful, a future where humanity would lead not through destruction, but through compassion, unity, and the determination to create a better galaxy for all.